As I told you earlier, this might be the week, or maybe this will become a second week or a third week of us talking about trade. Because trade is what Trump has now used to completely upend the global order, not just economically, but also strategically. And there are trade wars being unleashed, there are retaliations taking place, there are capitulations also taking place. Vietnam saying immediately, take it 0 tariff, and Americans saying we don't want it, it's a sham, right? Or the Europeans saying take it 0, and Trump then saying no, not just now, but also give me reparations for 50 years where he took advantage of us. So all that tamasha is going on. Trade is going to be the big story of our lives. So we started it this Monday by talking about the China US trade situation, and we said Trump ko gussa kyun aata hai. So that was Trump ko China se gussa kyun aata hai. Now we should also see a little bit Trump ko India se gussa kyun aata hai, because Trump has said repeatedly, and these people have also said it, including Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, who's displayed those placards showing India's high tariffs, particularly on whiskey. So Trump has said several times, India is the biggest tariff abuser. India is the tariff king. He said so also in the presence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So let us look at the India-US trade situation. That's very interesting as well. I know many of you broadly have a sense of what it is, but let me give you some more precise understanding, or at least what I see as more precise understanding. Chances are some of you might be much wiser than me, in which case, thank you very much for staying with me. So here we are. First of all, look at India's larger trade situation. India's larger trade situation, India is a trade deficit nation. India is a trade deficit nation. The deficit between the previous year, that is 23-24 to 24-25, has gone up. However, any data point, any figure has to be seen in relation to something, as a percentage of something. So as a percentage of GDP, India's deficit has risen from 76.47 billion in 23-24 to 89.37 billion estimated 24-25. India's GDP has also risen. So as a percentage of GDP, India's trade deficit is not getting worse. In fact, India's current account situation is quite healthy, because whatever shortfall we have on foreign exchange, that is then made up for mainly through remittances, FDI when it comes. Lately it hasn't been coming, or foreign portfolio investments which have been coming in the past. Lately they've been going out, but still India is able to keep the balance because of remittances and stuff like that. However, India is a trade deficit nation. India has a trade deficit. Now, we know that our biggest deficit is with China, and then we'll have deficit with countries from whom we import oil. That will be a very one-sided situation. The Arab countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Russia, for example, very heavy deficit. But there are also countries with which we have surplus. So that is the interesting part we thought we'd look at today, because Trump is complaining that you have a surplus against me because you use tariffs against my exports to you, and that's the reason you have a surplus. Now, whether it's tariffs or not, let me give you a list at least of the prominent countries where India has surpluses. So first of all, I'll give you the basic figure. India's merchandise exports are 395. I'm cutting off the decimal points, unless what's at the other side of the decimal is significant, in which case I'll round it off. So India's exports are, say, $396 billion, merchandise exports. Imports are $657 billion. You will have the precise figures on your screen. $657 billion. So this means a neat deficit. So if you just look at the merchandise data, it looks like we'll have a humongous trade deficit. However, the final situation is not so bad. I just told you the final situation this year was $89 billion of deficit. So how do we arrive at that? Because there is also services trade. So on services, our exports are $355 billion. That is the year 24-25. And imports are only $183 billion. Services include all your IT stuff, outsourcing, software, etc., back offices, etc., etc., etc. So that produces a neat surplus that, when netted off against merchandise deficit leads you a reasonably manageable deficit of $89 billion. Of course, every country would like to have a surplus. Now, where is this surplus coming from? That's the other interesting thing. The surplus that India has is coming from almost all of it's coming from developed countries. Developed countries, much richer countries. In fact, even at the lower end of the surplus, the country, say a country like Bangladesh, right? It's not as developed as India, but in terms of basic incomes, per capita incomes, etc., social indicators, not that far behind. So, in fact, better in many areas. So you can't say that India's surpluses are exploitative with countries weaker than India. That's an irony. It's a delightful irony, also a useful irony. So the highest surplus India has is with the US, 45 billion. Number two, with the Netherlands, that is 17.4 billion. You will be surprised. It's a small country. How come India has a $17 billion surplus with Netherlands? How much trade India has with Netherlands? That's because it has one of the biggest trading ports in Europe. Netherlands becomes a kind of proxy for a certain category of goods traded with EU. Now, EU goods of a certain kind of manufacture, complexity, when they are traded with EU, that is registered through Netherlands. So it becomes a proxy for part of the trade with EU. So $17 billion surplus with Netherlands, which is the larger European region, and $16.5 billion surplus with the EU. So between Netherlands as the proxy and EU, that's exactly $35 billion worth of surplus that India has. So 35 plus 45 with America, that is $80 billion of surplus with the most developed countries in the world. Then you drop straight down to Bangladesh. With Bangladesh, India has $9 billion and UK 4.5 billion, Italy 2.97 billion, France, even though we import so much of Airbus, etc., still $0.9 billion, and so on and so forth. So these are India's prominent surpluses. Now see this other figure, because a lot of the sensitivity today is about merchandise, about manufactured goods. It's not so much about services, right? Services, even India and America, there isn't that much tension. But when you see merchandise and see where does India export, so India's largest export destination is the US. That is 18% of all of India's merchandise exports are to the US. The rest is divided here, there. I think number two is UAE, which is 8.2%. But with UAE, trade balance will then be influenced by the oil imports by India. Then we come to India and the US, right? What are the pain points? So I will do exactly what we did while talking about US and China. So once again, I'm picking up the top 8 data points. Top 8 items that US exports to India, or India exports to the US, or US exports to India and imports from India, and vice versa. So look at the US. The top item that the US exports to India, and once again, it's quite counterintuitive. You will think the top item US exports to India will be some really high-tech machinery, really complex manufacturing. No, it's almost like a third world, if not a third world, like a second world, if I may use that expression, natural resources export. It is minerals and fuel oils. That is $12.6 billion. On the other hand, what is India's topmost export to America? It's a complete opposite. India's topmost export to America is electrical goods at $14 billion. That is India's top export to America. America's top export to India is mineral fuels and oils. Whereas if I go down the American list, electrical goods comes at number 5 at just $2.21 billion. America, the big tech giant, sells India just over $2 billion of electrical goods, whereas it buys from India $14 billion of electrical goods. Now, there are layers within layers. A lot of the electronics India sells to America have underlying American value, or underlying value in a way imported from America. Apple phones, for example, the intellectual value there, the IP, the brand is imported from America. So that value goes to America directly, indirectly, any which way. However, this is the export situation and this is what Trump looks at. Number 2 item from America once again will surprise you. In fact, it jumped out at me. Number 2 item of American exports to India, you thought it might be armaments, right? No. In fact, armaments doesn't even feature in the top 10 because last year India did not import anything. This is last year's data. So number 2 point is pearls and precious stones, right? The great America. The first largest export item to India is mineral oils and fuels. Number 2 is pearls and precious stones, which is 5.3 billion. Whereas the number 3 item on the Indian side of exports to the US is exactly the same item, pearls and precious stones. Obviously, because in India, these are converted into jewelry. So these come as raw stuff to India. They get value added and are exported back. That is valued at $11.6 billion. So effectively, the second most exported American item to India, which is pearls and precious stones, this goes back to America at twice the value. And that amount is the value added. So it's 100% value added. That is the difference. Again, come to number 3 on the American side. That's machinery, boilers, and mechanical appliances. That is a little over $3 billion. You will have the precise figures, a little over $3 billion. I go to the same item. It's number 4 on India's exports to the US. That is $6.8 billion, machinery, boilers, and mechanical appliances. Even on that, complex manufactured goods, India's exports to the US are 2x of India's imports from the US. Then come to number 4. Number 4 is impressive because India has nothing comparable, that is aircraft. So I suspect that is the Boeings. And if Boeing was not in such a bad way right now, and Boeing aircraft, civilian aircraft would not be suffering as much as they are, maybe that number would have been higher, but it's $3 billion. India has nothing comparable there. Come to number 5. Number 5, electrical goods that I told you about. In America's case, 2.21. India's 14 billion. Then come to optical recordings and measures on the American side, about 2 billion. Plastics, about 1.5 billion. And then fruits and nuts, little over 1 billion. And once again, switch to the Indian side. See, what's number 2 on the Indian side? Number 1 is electrical goods, a lot of it's iPhones. But number 2 is pharma. That's Indian generic pharma. And that is $12.5 billion worth. Whereas, see, how much pharma do we import from the US? That doesn't feature in the top 8, won't feature in the top 10. In fact, I had to go way down to look for it. It's only $0.64 billion. And on that also, we put tariffs. And that's what Trump also complains about, that look, all your pharma comes to me in such humongous amounts, tariff-free, and a little bit that comes from my country to yours, and your country only imports what it doesn't make, because these are really new cutting-edge medicines which are still patented. Otherwise, why would India import them? India is the generic capital of the world, right? It's just over $500 million. And yet we put duty on this. How much? I will just tell you as we go along. In fact, if I go down the Indian list, it's quite ironical. At number 8 on the Indian list, number 8 on the American side is fruits and nuts. That's $1 billion. Fruits and nuts, right? And Trump administration, even the previous administration, Biden administration, they've been saying, why do you charge so much duty on our almonds or our pecan nuts? For heaven's sake, your country does not produce any pecan nuts. Usko to aane do. But we've kept that barrier in the name of protecting our farmers, while no farmer grows, no horticulturist grows any pecan nuts. That said, number 8 on the American side is fruit and nuts. The great mighty power, the biggest economic power in the world, high-tech power. Number 8 item is fruit and nuts. Number 8 item on the Indian side is vehicles and automotive components. And that's more than twice as much as even that fruit and nuts head. That is 2.6 billion. And then there is iron and steel, which is again 2.5 billions. And then various kinds of clothing, that is garments, knitted clothing, hosiery. If you add it all together, it comes to a little over $7 billion. Now you see what is the tariff differential and protection. So I will read some figures for you, but you will see charts. So I will not go over everything. You can see these charts. Charts will stay on your screens, so you can see them at leisure. let your eye gaze over them and see what's the difference. For India, obviously the color is saffron. For America, the color is blue, right? And you will see that it's awash with saffron. These charts. So see plastics. India charges about 10%, 9.95. US 4.38. Now I will dispense with decimals. All machinery and boilers. India is nearly 7%, more than 6.5%. America just over 1%. Railways, aircraft, ships. India a little over 5%. America nominal 0.2%. Leather products. India nearly 12%, America just over 7%. Ready-mades and used clothing. Now, a lot of used clothing is exported by developed countries to countries where people might be willing to buy either used clothing or to recycle them. That India protects at nearly 12%, America has at 9%. Then products of base metal. India has 4%, America has 3%, that's quite close. Ores, minerals, and petroleum, these are the two in which America has higher duties than India. Not by a lot, but still higher. Ores, minerals, and petroleum, America has 6.67 compared to ours, which is a little over 2. And garments, America has 12 compared to our 7.5. But that, I suspect, came in the first Trump administration when India and the US could not have a trade deal, and the America took away some of our preferential quotas, etc., for garment imports. And that's where a country like Bangladesh benefited greatly because it had its least developed country status and therefore got zero duty exports of garments from Bangladesh. Then you can go over some other heads where distinction is really large. Alcohol. The US is 2.5%, India is 125%. Dairy, the US is 1.5%, India is 40%. Fish and meats, the US is 0.5%, India is about 29%. Live animal products, that's meat, etc., US is just 0.6%, India is 29%. Now, all of this is done in the name of protecting agriculture. And that is something that the US Trade Department has mentioned in its report. Processed foods. America is less than 5%, just a little less than 5%. India is nearly 30%. Edible oils. America is 1.4%. India is a little over 12%. And I don't understand that because it's an essential commodity. India needs to import it to fulfill its needs because India needs a lot of edible oil. India is short on edible oil. India has to import it. So why charge duties on this and make it more expensive for your customers? Because if you're short of an agricultural commodity, it's not as if by importing this, you are competing with your domestic farmer and there will be a surplus in your domestic farmer's hands. You have a shortage and you are importing. However, trade negotiations are a game of hardball. There are some areas where American tariffs are higher. Cigarettes, for example. Cigarettes, America is 201%, India is 33%. And then you come to pharma. Pharma is important and critical. That is, US is just 0.01%, which must be just to register an import, right? Just a notional tax. India is almost 11%. Why? It can't even be, the idea can't even be to protect some particular pharma product or company, because if that was available in India, why would anybody import? This is just instinctive, just the instinctive old Indian protectionist state reacting. And these are areas where India, I'm sure now, will be willing to make concessions or, in my view, corrections. That's the reason one of my recent national interest columns said, thank you, Donald Trump, for putting the gun on our heads, because that will force us to reform, which we've been not only postponing, but which we have reversed on trade in the past 10 years or so. Electrical goods, telecom equipment, again, the US has only 0.4%, we have 7.6%. It doesn't make any sense because India is a big exporter in that area. Again, you see why India is called the highest tariffing nation. So see this chart. India's average tariffs are 14.2%. See that bar, 14.2%, followed by Argentina. Argentina is just under India. Precisely speaking, India is about 14.2, Argentina 14.1, so they're about. Brazil at about 12, South Korea at about 11, and then see the important ones. China comes to about 7 and US is only at about 2.7. And this data comes from the World Bank. So this is the equation right now. And this is the reason why Donald Trump says India is a tariff king. It is the highest tariffing nation, so on and so forth. Underlying this is also a reality that America is able to export even to India very little, which is genuinely value added or job creating. And that's the reason America will see the need. There will be a lot of pressure for India to allow more of America's agricultural exports into India. And once again, as the US trade representative's report says, India then says, give me a non-GMO certificate. In America, there is no such certification. There is no need for such certification seen. One, because most of American big crops, soybean, corn, they are all GMO now. And second, as the USTR report says, there is no scientific basis to certify anything as GMO or non-GMO. And they see India's refusal to allow the import of these products into India, which India might be buying from elsewhere on the grounds that they don't certify them as non-GMO. They see this as a non-tariff barrier. These are the realities and complexities of the India-US trade. I know in the course of time, over the next several weeks, there will be a deal. There will be an early deal. Let us see what will change with this equation, with that deal. A lot will change with this.